The most troublesome prisoners in New South Wales were exiled to the Moreton Bay penal colony, later to become Brisbane, and conditions were severe. One punishment was grinding grain by walking on a treadmill for up to 14 hours a day, so it's not surprising that some absconded, but their choices were bleak. No free settlers were permitted within 80 kilometres of the colony, so bushranging wasn't really an option, and escapees often just vanished in the bush or returned sheepishly to the colony to face further punishment. After the penal colony was closed, settlers were allowed in the Brisbane area in 1842. The first known robbery occurred in 1849, when two unnamed men stole 2 horses and an audible, virtually blank cheques from Glenelg Station on McIntyre Brook, west of Warwick, but the conclusion is unknown. Queensland was separated from New South Wales in 1859, but within a few years was almost bankrupt, until saved by a significant gold discovery at Gympie in 1866, also offering new opportunities for bushrangers. George Palmer was quick to take advantage of this during his short life of 23 years, bailing up coaches around the goldfields. He was shot by a passenger when holding up a Cobb & Co coach in 1869, but escaped to Rockhampton, and later that year was involved in the murder of a gold buyer. He was captured, tried, and during a thunderstorm was hanged. An accomplice in the Gympie robbery, William Bond, was also shot through the abdomen by a passenger, so he was easily captured and later sentenced to 20 years hard labour and 50 lashes. Also near Gympie in 1868, William Troden, known locally as Podgy, and Joseph Blake held up 4 men at Yabba near Imbil. Despite a scarf across his face, Podgy was recognised by one of his victims, leading to his arrest a week later at Kilcoy. A missing shoe made Blake's horse easier to track, but it was 3 weeks before his arrest. Both were convicted in Maryborough and jailed. In 1879, a coach was halted a mile from Gympie by a barricade across the road and, apparently with foreknowledge, a lone armed man made off with a box of jewellery and other items. But his loot was too heavy to carry far, and he hid it nearby. A reward was offered and the stolen goods were recovered. Other items left behind led to the arrest of a local miner, Christian Jensen, who was sentenced to 15 years. Despite the value of the cargoes near the goldfields, escorts seemed a rarity, so less than a month later, another coach was robbed nearby, but I could not find any following reports. The wild Scotchman, James McPherson, was the son of free Scottish migrants who had found work at Cressbrook Station. He did well at school and learned French and German until he went bush in 1863, becoming a talented bushman. 2 years later, he held up a publican in Bowen and, after a reward was offered, headed interstate, committing highway robberies along the way. He had intended to join Gardner's gang, but returned to the Wide Bay area and was captured at Gingin. Various court appearances and escapes followed, and during an attempted escape from St Helena, he was shot in the wrist. Released after serving 8 years, he found work as a stockman back at Cressbrook. In 1878, he married at Blackhall and went on to father 6 children. A fall from a horse at Burketown at 53 ended his life in 1895. In 1880, Joseph Wells robbed a bank in Cunnamulla and, during his escape, accidentally shot a storekeeper. After becoming separated from his horse, he hid in a tree in town, but a barking dog gave him away and he was arrested by the local sergeant. Despite appeals for clemency, he became the last person in Queensland to be executed for armed robbery. Johnny Campbell, a cabby man, was born near Imbil and hanged in Brisbane Jail on Petrie Terrace in 1880, the same year as Ned Kelly. While working as a stockman, he had saved a young lad from drowning, but later went bush after being accused of assault and attempted rape. Tried in Maryborough, he served 8 years After release, he bushranged extensively through the southeast corner of the state before being captured at Taunton the next year. He was convicted of robbery and rape, although he maintained innocence of the latter. After his execution, his preserved body was sent to a Berlin university. Other Queensland Aboriginal bushrangers include Wild Toby, a survivor of white reprisal killings who operated around the Dawson River. After killing a policeman, he was shot by police in 1883, and his skull displayed in Wandoan for a time. Joe Flick had been involved in a number of crimes, escapes and shootings with police when, at 24, he was shot by native police in the Gulf country in 1889 after killing a tracker. Aboriginal trackers, with their uncanny ability to follow a fugitive, often played a significant role in apprehending bushrangers. The Kenniff brothers initially duffed cattle in Western Queensland, but in 1903, a policeman, together with a station manager, caught up with them in wild country above the western side of Carnarvon Gorge. Patrick Kenniff was bizarrely later caught with the men's burnt remains in his saddlebags. After a number of trials and government intervention, both brothers were found guilty of the murders, but only Patrick was hanged in Boggo Road Jail in 1903, becoming one of the 42 people hanged there during its operation. Unusually, Patrick was buried in Dutton Park Cemetery after his family arranged a coffin and hearse. James Kenniff continued to maintain Patrick's innocence. He served 12 years and became the last Australian bushranger to die from cancer in Charters Towers in 1940. The Northern Territory was not separated from South Australia until 1911, and although gold was discovered at Pine Creek in 1871, settlement was very sparse north of the present South Australian border. Some bushrangers may have ventured there occasionally from other states, but none called the Territory home, although, as stated in Part 2, Harry Redford settled and died there. The isolated Swan River colony, later to be called Perth, began in 1829 to deter the French settlement of the area. 20 years later, a public meeting called for transport of convicts to provide a labour source to boost the sluggish economy. The first consignment landed in June 1850, and by 1868, nearly 10,000 convicts had been transported into the colony, at that time outnumbering free settlers. One of the transportees was Moondine Joe, who had been transported for stealing some bread and food. He became Western Australia's best-known bushranger, operating before the gold era in the southwestern corner of the state, and was known for escaping, stealing horses and robbery. In 1867, with two others, he escaped from Fremantle Jail, but within a few days one had been shot dead. The other two eluded native trackers for months until one was shot and wounded and returned to jail. Joe was eventually caught, but managed many more escapes until getting his ticket of leave in 1871. He then took up prospecting, but after his wife passed away, died of dementia in 1900 in what was then the Fremantle Lunatic Asylum. In 1876, 6 escapees avoided becoming bushrangers after they were spirited away by an American whaling ship. Having been transported from Ireland to Fremantle as Fenians, they were effectively political prisoners, and their rescue involved an elaborate plan hatched by former countrymen residing in the USA. After escaping while working outside the jail, they were rushed to Rockingham, where they were collected by the whalers' cutter and taken offshore to the Catalpa. As it was waiting in international waters, authorities could not prevent their departure to America. Most went on to become respected US citizens. Thomas Hughes was born in 1866 aboard the convict ship Corona on its passage from Western Australia. His father was a warder during the voyage, and the family then settled in Perth. In 1887, 2 policemen investigating the theft of tools and a case of dynamite stopped Hughes. but he escaped after shooting Constable O'Connell, who later died. So a reward of £200 was offered for Hugh's capture. But he'd worked in the bush for a few years and evaded capture for 3 months until wounded in a gunfight with police. He was tried and sentenced for life for manslaughter. 6 weeks later, he escaped from Fremantle prison after attacking a warder. When caught, he received 36 lashes for the assault and 3 years in irons for a burglary he committed while on the run. After release in 1896 on a ticket of leave, he moved to the Pinjarra district and married 8 years later. He died in 1944 in the Hospital for the Insane at Claremont. Gold was not discovered in Western Australia until 1893, and most of the state was quite sparsely settled, so offered slim pickings for would-be bushrangers. When gold transport began in earnest, the Perth Mint, aware of what had happened in eastern states, took steps to deter robbery. An official armed gold escort accompanied trains from Kalgoorlie, and in 1907, a special carriage containing a strong room was included. It could contain over half a ton of gold, and armed police were locked in with the gold. South Australia became a separate state, with boatloads of free settlers arriving in 1836. So, in the late 1830s, Adelaide was virtually a tent city. During a bungled robbery of the Treasury, which was also housed in a tent, the sheriff was shot and wounded. In response, the first armed, paid police force in Australia was established. The offenders were captured, and one, Michael McGee, met his end in a badly botched hanging. George Hughes, Henry Curran, and James Fox operated near Gawler around 1840, before eventually being apprehended while drunk in a hotel. 2 were escapees from New South Wales and were ultimately hung in a public execution with charges including theft, armed robbery and rape. During the 1860s, John and David Kearney committed many armed hold-ups, together and separately. John had been using the name Captain Thunderbolt, copying Ward in New South Wales. After his arrest at his father's shop in Adelaide, both brothers were tried in 1867 and sentenced to death, later commuted to life imprisonment. They were released after serving 14 years in Yatala prison and died free men. Surely Australia's most eccentric bushranger was the diminutive birdman of the Coorong, John Peggotty, born 3 months premature in 1864 in Limerick, Ireland. It is said he was the size of a 7-year-old child when he turned 18. In the last few years of the 18th century, he reputedly rode an ostrich while committing more than a dozen hold-ups and several murders. He was shot while escaping after a hold-up and is assumed to have died in the Coorong. Neither his remains nor his stash of gold and jewellery has been found. Does this sound plausible or a fable?